Hello and welcome to Jung at Harp. Today we're going to talk about imagination. My name is Deborah Henson-Conant and I'm here with Kathleen Wiley. I am a composer and a performer, and I also teach in an online school, and Kathleen is a performer and she also is a Jungian psychoanalyst, and we both play the harp, and so we call this Jung at Harp. So this morning in the middle of the night, often before we're going to meet, I wake up and I think, I want to talk about this. I woke up and I was thinking, I want to talk about faith, trust, and belief, and what is the difference? And then I woke up in the morning and I thought, I want to talk about avoidance. And then we started talking, and as we started talking, you kind of brought them all together under the mantle of imagination. Do you remember how you did that?
I'm not sure. But what I know now is that our imagination is one of the greatest resources that we have, because our imagination allows us to have vision, and to create a vision of what we want, to create a vision of who we are, to create a vision of the community we live in and the world around. I mean, imagination, and Albert Einstein as well as Jung said that, imagination may actually be the greatest resource that humanity has, and that it is the source of fantastic accomplishments, but also the greatest ills. Because anything that's brought into manifestation, that is put into a physical form, begins in the imagination. It begins with the use of our faculties, where we can begin to put things together. So, if we're going to talk about what is faith, what is trust, what is belief, and how do we avoid, why do we avoid, and how do we not do it, then we're going to have to engage our imagination first.
Okay, so let me go back for 1 minute and say, I always, whenever somebody says vision, I think, but what about people who are blind? I know they have the imagination, so what kind of vision is this? It's a different kind of vision.
Yeah, I'm not talking at all about physical vision. Right. In fact, some people who are physically blind have the greatest capacity for vision, because they have what the Eastern tradition talks about as the third eye. They have this internal vision that allows them to see the energetics. And that might sound like an oxymoron or an anachronism. How do you see the energetics? Because we think of energy as visible, but it's kind of like electricity. We see the results of electricity. We don't see the electricity, but we see the results of it. Yes. And so our imagination is like this system through which energy flows and comes into a form that we can see first internally. And that has nothing to do with physical eyes.
Well, you also said put things together. So we can, that vision, the vision of our imagination, allows us to put things. Oh yes, of course. And in the normal world, things normally come together that are normal together. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the things that my imagination loves to do is put disparate things together, even like. I used to I haven't done this for a while, watch 3 movies at the same time, where I would choose 3 movies and I would watch one for 20 minutes and then the next for 20 minutes and the next for 20 minutes, and then go around until the stories would start to combine in a new way in my mind. And so things that we can't put together in real life because it takes a lot of time to actually put them together. Mm-hmm. Well, for example, this instrument. In my mind, it was mother is a concert harp, father is an electric guitar. What is their child? Mm-hmm. That would be very hard to put together in the real world. It was difficult. It was in my brain. It was there in a second, and then I could see it, and I could see myself playing it. I could see the situations that then took 10 years to actually have those happen in reality. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So going back to avoidance, faith, trust, and belief by using the make-believe. Because imagination is make-believe, right?
Yes and no. I think we associate make-believe with not being real, but yet imagination is real. Your electric harp is real. So often the real in the sense of the physical world begins in the imagination, which a lot of people do dismiss as make-believe and ridiculous and not valuable. But those people are cutting off the source of creativity and the source of all life.
Well, so okay, so the genesis of this is I first had this image. I just had this image and experience of being on stage with this harp, with the power of it, like that experience. And then I made believe by taking a little tiny harp, making it look like this, putting it on, and literally going to like the most visionary harp builder in the world and make believe in front of him. Like I literally took that and said, watch this. I made the sounds. So that was just like a kid, but that's what I had to do. I had to make believe so that he could get the spark of what was in my imagination. Without doing that, I mean, other people, I guess, call it storyboarding or whatever, but it's make believe for somebody else.
As you're saying make believe, I'm thinking make belief.
Right.
Now we're back to what is belief? How do we create or cultivate belief? So belief in our own value, our own worth, our own artistry, is we make believe. We have to, in the 12-step programs, they often say, fake it till you make it.
Right.
This is where imagination is so key, is that ability to pretend even when we don't feel it in that regard. But in the process, we make believe. And as we make believe, then trust is going to grow. And in this case, trust in your own vision, trust in your own dream, trust in your own capacity to realize that in the world grew.
You're making me think about this. I was happened to be looking through something that I had done for my students, and I saw myself telling this story, which is when I was first learning to play the harp. And I learned as an adult. I came at 22, but I had a lot of musical sensibility, so I was immediately put into situations that were way beyond my technical capacity, and I had to figure out how to try to fit into them. And when I would practice, I was very diligent. I had checklists, like I did this and I did this and I used a metronome. But at the end of every practice session, I would allow myself to make believe that I could play the whole piece. Mm-hmm. And so if I was working on Ravel's Introduction and Allegro, which is completely unplayable on this harp, at the end of the session, I would go like this. Bum, 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 and I would go through the whole piece, and I would be reading it. I was following, but I was doing something that was no one would know that's you'd be crazy if you thought that that's what I was doing, but that's how I got the whole piece. Like that's how I got, instead of trying to get the minutia of it, I had to do that to make believe to get the whole arc of it that I could then fit into later on by making each of the pieces work.
That's beautiful. I'm going to try that this week with a couple of tunes I'm learning.
Okay. There's something in my background that's really bothering me, and I just got rid of it. Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
what would you try? What are you trying? What did you see there that you want to try to do?
Well, that you let yourself play through the entire piece, even though you full well knew you weren't playing the piece as written,
Right.
but you had it in your head, you could hum it, and you let your hands be on the harp and do something.
Right.
You know, um,
I was playing the music, but not the notes.
yeah,
Because none of the notes were there.
yeah. And what a wonderful use of the imagination to cultivate trust in your own desire and belief that you could be a harpist.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, so how can I apply that same, can we break this down, which is what we're doing,
Yeah.
so that I can then apply it to other things in my life
Mhm.
that are not that. So it was very fluent for me to do that with a harp because I could do it in the moment. I could
Mhm.
be like, just act like a harpist, act like I can play the piece. So now the things that are more of a challenge to me in my life are things that seem to take a great deal of time. But I think it's but I think it's because again, I'm stuck in the minutia. And what happened when I did this thing is I just let all the minutia go. Like right now, some of this stuff that I'm dealing with is like, well, I have a show coming up, so needing to send out all the publicity. I'm working on my musical. I have to figure out like how do we get all the logistics of that because we're doing it remotely, and how do I deal with the administration in the back end of my school and like this thing isn't automated yet, blah 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 blah. How and each of those, as I see them, I'm just caught in the like in that. So I can't even ask for help because I'm realizing now what I did in this case was, well, I'm mixing everything in my head, but one thing I'm mixing in my head, like with this harp, was make believe, show it to somebody else who can actually help me. If I
Mhm.
tried to make this harp myself, it never would have happened ever.
Mhm.
But I took my make believe to someone who had the skills.
Mhm. So you had to trust that your idea that was born from your imagination, from your desire to play the harp, to strap the harp on and play it like an electric guitar, you had to trust that that desire and that imaginary product had worth and value enough that this premier harp builder would be interested. And he was.
I didn't think of it that way.
So you also had, this whole element of trust, because I'm thinking about what we were talking about off camera too, about avoidance
Mhm.
and how we avoid sharing, whether it's avoiding sharing our music or avoiding sharing, our desires with a friend, or avoiding sharing our longing or our feeling of closeness with a potential intimate partner. We avoid all of these things because somewhere we don't trust our own imagination. We don't trust that the desires that would, that are, well, let me say it differently. We have not yet allowed ourselves to use our imaginations to embody the desires.
I think I hear the dog. Is the dog?
Yeah.
I love that. I feel like I can imagine what he's doing. Doing. So I love that you're saying desires, so that we're not just imagining. Right. I wasn't just imagining. Oh, here's a great idea. When I imagined this harp, I was imagining what I could express of myself. And I couldn't, I didn't even, I had never expressed that part of myself, maybe in make believe, but I was imagining a vehicle that would let a part of myself free. And that's just not just free, but give it voice, give it the voice of my body. It's
With
as though
love.
I was missing that part of my body, and there it was. And what did you just say?
I'm sorry, I interrupted, but it would flow.
It would
You,
flow into that.
it was part of you then had a vehicle, a bridge to flow into the world.
Right, that's right. And in the parts of my life that I feel like I'm stuck, that I'm not flowing into that part. And I think it's often because of avoidance. I think I'm often setting up. I mean, I could have had this idea written, like my mother had brilliant ideas all the time. She'd write them down on a piece of paper. She'd put them in an envelope. She'd send them to herself so that she had a record that she had invented it. But then it was in an envelope you couldn't open. So the idea was basically hidden. It was a perfect analogy. And I think that so many of the things that are important to me are hidden. This wasn't, for some reason. I was able to share that.
So maybe then there was something of your desire that was bigger than you, that had enough power, enough numinosity. I know you like that word. Meaning, for me, numinosity, meaning energy of its own, that was just pure essence, the seed. That there was something of your desire that was bigger than you. It really came from the largesse of your soul. And it had a numinous quality that pulled you towards it. Now we're in the realm of faith, as far as I'm concerned. Because my favorite definition of faith comes from Dion Fortune, who was a psychologist in the early 1900s. She was a contemporary of Carl Jung and a bunch of other creative minds at the time. And she founded the Society for Inner Light. And Dion Fortune's definition of faith is that faith is the result of a supra-conscious experience which cannot yet be translated into terms of brain consciousness, but nonetheless, which we are changed forever by. So let me break that apart. That faith is the result of a superconscious experience, transcendent, something numinous, something larger than ego, larger than littlest self, which cannot yet be translated in terms of brain consciousness. Our ego cannot take it over, put it into words, and say, look what I did. But which we are nonetheless changed by. Something internally in our experiencing changes. That's what took you to heart maker until you got to Comac. And they said, yeah, we can do this. And they started playing with you with it.
And by the way, other people said yes, they just didn't necessarily, they didn't have the, what I think made the big difference is until that point, I was telling people about it. And that did not take what was in my imagination. I was not making believe for them. I was trying to describe it. But when I went to Joël Garnier, I was make-believing. That was the huge difference of that moment. I mean, probably him, that he as well, but I made a crappy little version of my own that didn't work in anybody's brain except mine. But I pretended it for him.
You created the prototype.
Right, that's right. Yeah, I created a prototype.
You actually moved it from the inner imagination to the outer, what you called make-believe.
Right.
But that was the interim step between what was in the imagination, in your inner vision, your heart's desire, the make-believe prototype cardboard harp that you could strap on and show him was the prototype. It was the bridge to what sits behind you.
Yeah, it was the bridge. Yeah, it was a bridge to his imagination, because I think that by bypassing words, I bypassed both of our attempt to, I don't know, like what you said, put it into the ego. And it's like it spoke from my body movement to his understanding of that body movement, of what it could be big and the power that it could be. And I, as we're talking, I'm thinking about that's what I did also when I would pretend to play, introduction and allegro, is that I was, but then I was speaking to myself. This is what it would feel like if you could play this. This is what it would feel like. This is the feeling we're going into. So now I'm asking myself as we're speaking, with the things that I'm struggling with today, or that my challenges today, I think I'm all cerebral with them, that I haven't found a way to get into the physical imagination that would bring it alive for me. I'm trying to craft it.
Yeah, and you're trying to craft it only using the intellectual function, which is not connected
Right.
to the energy of the heart.
Right.
Once
Right.
the intellect takes it over, there tends to be disconnect in all areas of our life. But when we can get our body and our heart and our gut, we get those centers into it too. And the intellect then serves the heart and the gut instead of doing its own little side trips.
Right. And you can solve the technical problems of making that gesture happen. And I talk to students a lot about the gestures of movement, because I see people, the gestures of music. I see people who don't play the harp at all come up to the harp, and especially if I've set up some rock or blues, something, and they'll just they don't have anything to prove. They'll just make it come alive. Whereas people who know how to play are struggling with that. They're struggling with getting into the fluency of a thing because of the technical hurdles or technical, I don't know.
Well, because in their imagination, have put themselves in boxes.
Oh, so we've limited our imagination.
Uh-huh. And the imagination now has become a servant of the shoulds, must, and ought tos that the intellect has grabbed hold of. So we've learned to avoid a lot of different ways of moving, expressing, being.
Wow. So I have this tool that I use with my students called Clarify Your Vision.
Mhm.
And it's a way of coming at a project purely from seeing yourself in it rather than trying to craft it. And and every time I do it and every time other people do it, we see something that we hadn't seen before. We see a vision. And I'm realizing I'm just not using that tool as much. And I could be using that tool. And of course, I'm thinking, well, I made it up. How good could it be?
See, now we go to a lack of trust.
Okay, let's go there. So, talk to me
Yeah.
about.
I mean, my own experience, Deborah, is that so often we avoid the very thing that's needed because of its simplicity. And we think, oh, it's got to be much more complicated than that. Oh, it just can't be as simple as sitting down and using my visioning sheet. When the simple is the very thing that we need. So I think sometimes we avoid because we've devalued and we don't trust.
Oh, do we avoid because we devalue, or do we devalue because we are trying to avoid?
I think both. I
Uh-huh.
think it becomes circular.
And
Yeah,
then we're in that pattern, and that's comfortable, and then it's and
it's
so
familiar.
yeah. And it's why do we it's so bizarre. So my therapist talked about this years ago. He said, I never, and it's such a pain. He said, I never understood why people find something that works and then they stop doing it. And it was just I could tell that he would help them find it and they'd get it, and then we'd stop. And I heard somebody else talk about that the other day. And you said something also that we want to complexify. I've found something that works for me and for, people I coach and mentor, and I'm not using it every day or even every week.
Yeah.
I'm not engaging my imagination
Mm-hmm.
because it is sort of like going to the imagination gym to use this thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we forget and we do begin to devalue it. I mean, it's the problem of the familiar. You know, sometimes the things we're familiar with, we just dismiss and overlook.
Like
I
the
mean,
fact that water comes out of our taps.
yeah, we get so familiar with it that we don't really value it until it stops. Then
Right.
all of a sudden its importance is brought back. But, you know, I think what your therapist said to you years ago is really worth our holding in our imagination. That if we can just wake up every day and say, okay, what do I know works for me? And if it's working, keep doing it. And if it isn't working, then it's the time to say, okay, what might I do differently? And you're so wonderful in your classes with your students of saying with the music, if what you're doing doesn't work, change one thing. Don't change 10 things at one time. Change one thing. If that doesn't work, change another thing. You said your mother taught you to do harmony by you hold this note as long as it sounds good, and then when it doesn't, go up half a step. If that doesn't sound good, go up. But you do one thing at a time. And I think sometimes we avoid because we have this idea we should do 10 at one time.
Right.
And if we can just say, okay, I'm going to look at this like my vision for the day, and I'm going to pick one area that I'm going to do my vision sheet for, then that probably feels manageable. But if I sit down and think, oh, I should do it for this area, this, I should do it for my music, my personal life, my writing, my practice, then I'm probably going to all of a sudden feel overwhelmed and avoid.
Aha, okay. So overwhelm, okay, we desire, overwhelm, complexity. I'm just thinking of some of the words we've said here: imagination, belief, trust, faith. And the point of all this is so that things that we desire, that we are, we will let them out. I mean, and that ideas that we have that seem impossible or too complex, that we will find ways to actually break them down, or let them, or give them to somebody else, or that we will use our imagination to open up to new possibilities, is what I think I'm hearing here. Because I'm equating what I'm challenged with in my life now to what I was challenged with when I was imagining this harp and it didn't exist. If I had kept it all to myself, it would never have happened. So how can I take the other things in my life and create some kind of a prototype so that I can see the flow, so that I can, in a sense, set them free enough to be able to show what they are.
Right. And sometimes we have to show ourselves. I mean, I'm imagining when you created the make-believe electric harp, you were actually showing yourself how it could be done.
Right, right. And oh, okay, so, oh, I'm going to need a harness. Okay, all right. So let's see, who else, what other musicians use harnesses? Okay,
Yeah.
how do I go to that? Okay. Right, because it's like, when we just think something in our head, we, how people always have ideas for other people. Oh, you know what you should do? You should do blah, 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 because they're only thinking it in their head. So it seems really easy. So it was like, boom, the instrument's there immediately. But once I start actually trying to build it, then I start seeing, okay, oh, we're going to need a volume control. Oh, wait a second, we're going to need well, then I'm going to need that. And then, and it kind of helps to structure it, and it also opens it up. Opens it up because then it has a life. It starts. And then when I gave it to Joel, it started meaning something else for him, because he cared about the shape. What was what would make it beautiful? And then he started thinking about what would make it ergonomic, what would make it what would make it accessible to stereo controls, all things that were not important to me at all. They would have been over time, but I wouldn't have thought, make it ergonomic.
Right,
Like, get it on, just let's get going.
Yeah, yeah. So the other thing that seems important in our conversation as we're wrapping things up is that sometimes taking the next step, trusting that if we just take the next step, we know that then the step beyond that will open up. That if we wait till we know all the steps before we start, we will probably avoid starting for a long, long time. But if we trust, this is what I know now, and we have the faith of our own desire and act on that one thing we know, then the next thing will show itself to us. The imagination will come to our aid. The essence of the thing that wants to be shared will pull us forward. And we all know that there is an element of what Jung called the larger self, what we can call our psyche, larger soul, that's at work in the imagination. That it's not ego fueled. And where it's ego fueled is usually where we get stuck. But it is where we open up to the mystery of the life force. Some people call that God, Allah. I mean, there are many names, but when we open up to the light, if we want to call it light, when we open up to the source of the mystery of the life force that flows through us, then the imagination is the agent that just keeps pulling us forward with the next step. But we take the step, we trust, this is what I know. So this is what I'm going to do now with what I know. And then we learn something else and we incorporate that. And that's what you did with the harp, with the DHC light. That's what you and Joelle did.
Right, right. And so it takes trust. So did you say, you said something where I couldn't hear if you said life or light. And when to go, there was something about going to, and I was like, light. Well, light is what gives us vision. So if we're even an internal light, you also made me realize that taking that step, I remember one really profound experience I had. I was writing a musical and I just didn't even know what it was. And I was with a musical theater group at that time. And I put it down on paper in the shape of a play, what I knew. And I remember just feeling deep shame that I was going to share this nothing thing with my group. And yet it was my turn. And so I just put it in the shape. I put it in the shape of a play.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's something there that I need to think about. Put it in the shape of a play. And I gave it to them and just burning with shame the whole time that they were reading it. And then they discussed it as though it was a play. They didn't look at what it wasn't. And I remember in that moment seeing it take shape because I had dared to give this shamefully inadequate thing to someone who I trusted, because we had guidelines about the feedback, and I'd been working with them for so long, and it took shape in that moment, and it ended up becoming a really beautiful thing because there was also a dramaturg in that room who happened to know about the things I was trying to write about and came and helped me shape the whole thing. But it never would have happened if I hadn't had the courage. I did not feel courageous at all. I felt ashamed and I felt like I was humiliating myself. And yet that is what allowed the thing itself that was trying to come out of me to get the help that it needed to be able to take its own true shape.
Yes. So in that case, you could trust the structure of the play and you trusted this group.
Right.
You trusted this group that could usher you and help you birth new parts of yourself. So we need people we can trust to help us learn to trust ourselves more. It works in tandem, actually. The more we trust ourselves, then the more we are able to discern and trust others. But trusting others allows us also to trust ourselves. It's intertwined.
Wow. Well, I would love to go more into that, how we find people to trust. But I know it's time, maybe we can do that in a next
Yeah.
next session. So, this was a tough session because I feel like I came to it with like, let's talk about all these disparate things and how they fit together. But that was really beautiful, Kathleen. I got a lot out of this. I'm gonna go back to my worksheet, my visioning
Mhm.
worksheet, and I'm really gonna go back and listen to what you said here again. I really love this.
I'm going to pull out your vision worksheet too this week.
That's great. So for anybody else who's watching this, what would we say to them? I would say think about the shape of what you even if it's something that seems amorphous, something that you imagine in your life, whether it's a relationship or whether it's something that you want to create, imagine its shape and your gestures with it, and play with those, so that you can experience the feeling of it and you can actually let it to start to come out more and create some kind of prototype, even if it's a completely imaginary prototype that you could show somebody else, even if you don't have someone you trust yet to show. That's what I would say to play with that. How about you, Kathleen?
I would say, and take the next step that you know on whatever that burning heart's desire is. Take the next step. Don't wait until you have the whole plan. Take the next step today.
All right, I'm going to take that and I'm going to run with it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you everybody who's listening to this. And I will look forward to seeing you all next week.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.